Dr. Templeton, Professor Taylor, ladies and gentlemen, it has been said on many occasions in the past that Christianity is on its deathbed. Some have claimed, on the contrary, that it is still only in its childhood. It is my opinion that Christianity, at the present time, in a large part of Europe at least, is undergoing noonday fatigue and faces the decision about what to do in the afternoon of its history. I found some of my inspiration for using the metaphor of the day for the history of Christianity in the work of Carl Gustav Jung. Jung uses the metaphor of the day to describe the development of the human personality in the course of a lifetime. The morning of life, youth, is a time for building the external structures of personality. Around the midpoint of life, there arrives a noonday crisis. It can take a form of shock or loss of previous certainties, crisis of marriage or occupation, financial or health problems, or burnout syndrome. The noontime crisis is also an opportunity for a major sea change, a change to tackle to task of the life's afternoon, to move from outward consideration to the depths. The afternoon of life requires greater simplicity and internalization. It is a journey to one's deeper inner center, das Selbst, self. It is, in a nutshell, my thesis. Christianity's long history, up to the beginning of modernity, represented its morning, a time for building institutions and doctrinal structures. Then, in the West, a noonday crisis occurred. The clash with modernity, secularization, the death of God, are all names used to describe this ongoing phase. And the crisis will continue until such a time as it will be understood as an opportunity, as a purge, as a path to maturity, a turning point moment, turning away from the external structures to the very core of Christianity. That core, I'm convinced, is kenosis, transcendence of self, self-emptying, giving oneself. As we read in the key text of the New Testament, Paul's letter to the Philippians about Christ. Although he was in the form of God, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. Another word of kenosis is love, self-sacrificing, and hence self-fulfilling love. The journey to that goal is by no means easy. I have designated the process of secularization during the period of modernity in Europe as that noonday fatigue, noonday crisis. These days, almost every sociological paper about present religious scene starts with the author distancing him or herself from previous theories of secularization by stating that secularization is definitely not a global phenomenon or even the probable future of humanity. As seemed likely just a half-century ago, that it is a term to be applied at most for a certain attenuation of some aspects of particular social role or a specific type of religion in one specific culture at one particular period. Secularization tendencies can be observed in many European societies with the onset of modernity, the emergence of religion as a separate segment of society alongside others, the privatization of religion, the separation of religious institutions from the state, the shift of religion from the sphere of politics to that of culture, a weakening of the supervisory function of the religious institutions in society, the questioning of the universal validity of certain religious doctrines, etc. One of the religion's important functions is to offer a common language whereby a given society may express its experience, its vision of the world, and the self-image of people of given culture at a given period. Religion often offers two levels of language, a popular form and a philosophical form, which is more intellectual and abstract and intended for an educated elite. At the threshold of modernity, the theology of the time lost the capacity to express man's new experience of the world and a new sense of the power of man over the world. Just as Latin ceased to be a lingua franca, the common language of intellectuals, so also Christian theology began to be regarded as a dead language. The Catholic Church of the time was capable of accepting Renaissance art, including its return to the pagan past of antiquity, but it found it very hard to accept Renaissance science. Science had greater success as a language of the educated elite than did theology. Science became its religion. Later, particularly in the 19th century, the Catholic hierarchy suppressed attempts of theologians to offer a more flexible language with which to express the experience of modern man. The church authorities voiced their fear that a new theology might have destructive impact on popular piety, and ordinary believers might feel affronted and frustrated. This was to cost the church dearly, because it was the educated who felt affronted and frustrated, and a large section of educated elites were alienated from the church. Shortly afterwards, a large proportion of ordinary people, the working class, those who had left the biosphere of traditional piety, village society, in the course of industrialization and urbanization, were alienated from the church. Secular humanism seemed to have acquired a monopoly of the interpretation of scientific achievements and thereby become the religion of the West. The ecclesiastical form of Christianity began to retreat to a ghetto on the European continent. I would like to stress that secularization is neither the end of Christianity nor the end of religion. Rather, it is the end of the Christian religion or Christianity as a religion. It is a sort of divorce between Christianity and religion. If we use the word religion in the sense of an integrated force in society, it means the things that integrate this society, it is its religion. The thing that integrates society is its religion. Then Christianity is no longer a religion, at least not the religion of Europe. It is assuming a new cultural form and role. By religion, in the sense of integrating force and common language, remains one of the main features of society, its content has changed. The West's religion became successively science, then in the Romantic period, culture, particularly art, then the nationalistic cult of the nation, and then the political religions of the 20th century. Today's religion is most likely capitalist economy and the mass media, the market of information, which is the main commodity of the present time. In the West, the media fulfills a number of roles. They were previously performed by historical religions, chiefly Christianity. Nowadays, the media interprets the world, offers common symbols and great narratives, and is arbiter of truth and importance, influencing the way people think and live. I have seen it with my own eyes at the TV screen, and it was the first news. So it is true and it's important. In the course of the modern era, Christianity has become one of the worldviews, Weltanschauungen, and has so far been seeking a role that would ensure its favorable acceptance by society. Is it to be the protector of a certain cultural tradition, an expert of ethical issues, a spiritual source of religious experience, an aesthetical accessory, the political vision of socially oriented left-wingers, or the political ideology of conservative right-wingers, or possibly an institution for the social and charitable care of the poor, ill, and disabled? Christianity can be said to have engendered two historically unique formations, namely the church and secular society. The church as an institution representing religion, yet not identical with the state, ethnic group of territorially bounded culture, is probably unique in history. Similarly, secular society would seem to be a unique phenomenon that sprang up by no means by chance in soil cultivated by Christianity over many centuries. I have called the process of secularization and the secular society the unwanted child of Christianity. Nonetheless, I have always regarded both currents, church-based Christianity and secular culture, as two versions or two branches of Christianity living side by side and in some respect intertwined and interacting. The Enlightenment and secular society emerged partly due to experiments in a third path of Christianity, alongside Catholicism and Protestantism, that had been taught by European intellectuals frustrated by religious disputes and the wars of both denominations. Many European intellectuals saw in the Enlightenment a new language in which to express their Christian faith more flexibly than in the language of traditional theology. But for some of them, their critique of the churches and the theology of the time led them to reject Christianity and seek a new religion of reason. The schism between traditional ecclesiastically oriented Christianity and the secular humanism of the Enlightenment came to a head on the European continent when the religion of reason joined hands with fanaticism, bloody terror, and violence against the churches during the Jacobin pace of the French Revolution. But because English and American revolutions did not take the form of Jacobinism, dialogue between Christianity and secular humanism continued in the English-speaking world. Later, that dialogue also spread to Europe. I believe that the great changes in the attitude of the Roman Catholic Church to the modern world would not have been possible without the experience of American Catholicism. Ecclesiastical Christianity has learned to live in modern society, and the dichotomy of the church on one side and the modern society on the other no longer applies. The church lives in modern world, and the modern world lives in the church, and not just in the milieu of so-called modernists. Even Christian fundamentalism is, in many respects, a typically modern phenomenon. Just as ecclesiastical Christianity, apart from exceptions, is not isolated from modernity and secular culture, secular society, for its part, is by no means as unchristian as it might appear. In certain respect, the opposite is true. Secularization and secular society are not the end of Christianity, but rather an absorption of Christianity into modern culture and civilization, and an absorption so serrate that is almost invisible by now, at least in Europe. Unlike the romantic vision of the Middle Ages as the golden age of Christianity, and modernity as Christianity's downfall, modern civilization is in many respects more Christian than the Middle Ages. Many political ideas of modern era, from the slogans of the French Revolution to the Declaration of Human Rights, as well as hopes for a just future or a future society of abundance, are simply secularized forms of classical concepts of Christian theology. The modern age has gone much farther towards fulfilling many Christian values and ideas, including St. Paul's appeals for an end to the barrier and inequalities between cultures, nations, sexes, and social classes than did Christendom, the Christian Europe of the Middle Ages. Secular culture contains far more Christianity than the protagonists of secular humanism are willing to admit. And yet, we are scarcely aware of the Christian nature of absorbed Christianity, the anonymous Christianity that Karl Rahner spoke about in respect of pious pagans is an expression that could be used in another sense nowadays to designate contemporary Western society and our secular culture. Christianity's absorption into modern society can be described as a success on its part, but that success has been offset by a loss of visibility. But that paradox only reveals the fundamental paradox of Christianity that is inherent in the very kenotic character of the gospel. The success of Christianity is its failure. The kingdom of God, says Jesus, is like leaven or like salt. Leaven, yeast, and salt are essential to bread, but if the loaf is good, you don't notice either the leaven or the salt. Reflections on Christians' character of secular society recall certain liturgical and theological disputes about the concept of the Eucharist. Is the purpose of sacramental bread to be consumed or to be stored, exhibited, and venerated? Some postmodern thinkers, like Gianni Vattimo, go as far as to regard secularization, the kenosis of Christianity, as the age of the Holy Spirit, about which Joachim de Fiore wrote in the Middle Ages and which inspired the radicals in the Franciscan movements. I don't take such a radical position. Instead, I tend to support the conclusion that was reached in the celebrated dialogue between Cardinal Ratzinger and Jünger Habermas at the Catholic Academy in Munich, 204, namely that secular humanism and Christianity have a mutual need for each other as a corrective to one-sidedness. And a similar position is adopted in John Paul II's encyclical Fides et Ratio, belief without reason is dangerous, and rationality without the ethical and spiritual values that stem from belief is also one-sided and therefore dangerous. I spoke in my books about the compatibility of faith and doubt, that faith without doubts, faith without critical questions could lead to fanaticism and fundamentalism, and the doubts without the basic trust could lead to cynicism, pragmatism, bitterness. If Christian theology is to become a competent instrument for dialogue with the other, it must inject into our understanding of church, of truth, and of the word a radical openness, a sense of eschatological differentiation between what is available to us now and what is the object of our eschatological hope. Christian tradition distinguishes three forms of the church. Firstly, there is the ecclesia militans, the church fighting Christians in this world. Secondly, the ecclesia patiens, suffering church, the souls in purgatory. And thirdly, the ecclesia triumphans, the church triumphant, the saints in heaven. It means the eschatological dimension of the church. Whenever Christians forget the need for eschatological differentiation between the church triumphant in the absolute future and the church militant here and now, they start to regard themselves as a perfect society, societas perfecta, already possessing the knowledge of the entire truth. Then Christian triumphalism comes into being with all its tragic consequences. The struggle of the ecclesia militans originally meant a struggle with one's own temptations and sins, including the temptation of triumphalism. If the church forgets the need for patient and humble openness vis-à-vis its eschatological future, it gives rise to a militant religion and a militant church battling against those others, those who are different, who hold different beliefs, whether in the external world or in the church's own ranks. If the noonday crisis of Christianity results in purification from triumphalism and the humble realization that the church is a communio viatorum, a pilgrim community, which in the words of St. Paul perceives ultimate truth only in part, only as in a mirror, then Christianity will be well prepared for the afternoon of its history. I fully agree with the words of Pope Benedict on his flight to Portugal, and I quote, "In these centuries of a dialectic between enlightenment, secularism, and faith, there were always individuals who thought to build bridges and create a dialogue. But unfortunately, the prevailing tendency was one of opposition and mutual exclusion. Today, we see that this very dialectic represents an opportunity and that we need to develop a synthesis and forward-looking and profound dialogue. So I think, said the Pope, that the precise task and the mission of Europe in this situation is to create this dialogue, to integrate faith and modern rationality in a single anthropological vision which approaches the human being as a whole and thus also makes human culture communicable. So I would say that the presence of secularism is something normal, but the separation and the opposition between secularism and the culture of faith is something anomalous and must be transcendent. The great challenge of the present moment is for the two to come together and in this way to discover their true identity. This, as I have said, is the Europe's mission and mankind's need in our history. End of the quotation. So the best quotation from the Pope Benedict are always what he said in the plane. He was perhaps too near to the bus. I also see the future of Europe in maintaining and enhancing the compatibility of those who profess an explicit Christianity on the one hand, and the guardians of the specific Enlightenment values on the other. Each side should have an interest in and feel responsibility for the presence of the other in European culture and society. Christians, as I sense from many of Pope Benedict's statements, also bear responsibility for preserving Europe's healthy secularism. And those who want a secular Europe and fear clericalism and fundamentalism should realize their interest in and responsibility for a credible Christian presence in the public life of the United Europe. Churches in the future will continue to operate within an increasingly pluralistic cultural milieu and will be characterized by a great internal pluralism. It would seem that in future there will emerge more ways of being a Christian than those we have become accustomed to. One of the salient features of afternoon Christianity, in contrast to the morning of its history, will most likely be a greater detachment from existing institutional and doctrinal structures and concomitant emphasis on a third path for church's action in addition to classical pastoral or missionary activity. The third path is accompanying seekers. The two predominant morning time activities of the church are targeted at dwellers, parishioners. Traditional pastoral activity has focused inwards on the ranks of practicing believers, and traditional missions have sought to broaden those ranks. The third part, focusing on seekers, does not consist of efforts to convert, unlike missionary activity, but to travel part of the journey together in dialogue. But if accompanying and dialogue are to be appreciated as a fully fledged service to the church of equal value to missionary activity, it presupposes a radical shift in ecclesiology, teaching about the church. Inspiration might be sought in the words of the Orthodox theologian Evdokimov. We know where the church is, but we don't know where she isn't. The church's self-reflection in the future will most likely give rise to a broader concept of ecumenism and Catholicity. Perhaps we have to learn to look at the church that way if we are to proceed from the noonday crisis into the afternoon of Christianity's history. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that, and thanks to Tomáš Halík for the wonderful presentation he made. Yes, we just discovered at dinner tonight that we actually met in 1979 in Prague. Our memories reconstituted the moment. I think what I can do here maybe is just try to help kick off the discussion by embroidering a bit that wonderful image that Tomáš presented to us of the noonday crisis. Only perhaps I'll just twist it a little. Instead of Carl Gustav Jung, let's take from Erik Erikson and talk about the midlife crisis. And I think we can put this up against our history in Western Christendom, and it can be quite illuminating. Thomas talked about that, the early life, the youth is building up something, building up a career, building up a manner of life, building a family perhaps. And then the moment comes when the crisis arises. And it arises perhaps more powerfully if the first part of the life has been tremendously successful. I think that model put against our history really tells us something, really reveals something. I'm talking now about Latin Christendom. The creation, the great achievement, was Christendom itself. And what is Christendom in our sense that we used it in the West, where we distinguish Christianity from Christendom? Well, it's a society, a political society, a culture, a set of folk ways, a set of morality, a set of manners of being and living which are impregnated, totally inspired by the Christian faith. It's as though the goal of this is building a total society and a total culture which is thoroughly penetrated with Christian faith. Yes, it takes over some elements from the ancients and so on, but it gives them a Christian formation. And this is something in its own way very admirable, and I'm not saying this was a mistake. Anything that can produce the Divine Comedy of Dante and the Chartres Cathedral, and I could go on, is not to be despised. But let's look again at this analogy of the noonday crisis, of the midlife crisis, precisely in its tremendous success. More than, I think, other Christendoms. There are other Christendoms that existed, other Christian communities outside this ambit, thinking of the Middle East, thinking of even ones that have disappeared, of the Nestorians who moved into China and Central Asia and so on. Perhaps it's this one, the Western one, which has been the most successful in creating that Christian society. But at a certain moment, that can be felt as a kind of captivity. And I think that is a key to a very important facet of our history, that at a certain moment, the creation of these political structures, of this morality, of these sets of rules for living, cease to really speak to people fully, require some change, which comes, if you think of the sexual morality, require change which comes in many ways from the very success and penetration of certain Christian goals and principles of equality, for instance, equality between the sexes. If you think of it from that point of view, these forms no longer properly fit. They get to be a kind of captivity. And I think that is what triggers the noonday crisis in the individual or the person. And that's why I think this metaphor, this model is very, very insightful. And so we get people thinking along lines of Congal, Yves Congal from one side, of Bonhoeffer from the other side, who speaks of a religionless Christianity. And what he means by that is that the Christian culture, as he saw it, which has been totally formed around in his case, the Lutheran faith in Germany, has become something which is kind of captivity for Christian faith, and it has to break free from it. Well, breaking free from it, what do you do? What do you do in your midlife crisis when you wonder whether the great achievements in your career and so on are really important, don't, and on the contrary, drag you down and so on? Well, you reach back into the very depth of what you've learned, what you've lived, the spiritual resources that you've had, and you try to come up with a new way of being you. And when we look at the new ways of being Christian that we see developing before us, we can see again this analogy holds. Right? First of all, I would give four ways in which it holds, I think, which connect up with important points in the argument that Tomáš just gave us. First of all, the situation in which people are more and more peeling off from elements of Christianity, from its political structures, from, particularly if you think of the Ancien Régime, from its political structures, from its moral formulations, from its rules of life, is a situation in which, if you hang on to them, the Christian faith becomes more and more defensive. It's more and more a question of stopping people from leaving or somehow holding on to certain forms. And I think the contrast between the two last supreme pontiffs, the two last popes, really gives one this sense of what the break can mean. We have with Benedict XVI, and I have great admiration for him as a human being and as a theologian, but the basic attitude was slipping away, Europe is leaving the fold, we have to hang on and get, as it were, Europe back. And then Francis comes, and I think that is the measure of the change. On the contrary, what we need now is to reach out even more, to enact the gospel by reaching out and helping and addressing the ills and sufferings of the world. And with this comes an immense confidence in place of a defensive fear. But then what are the resources we're moving back into, we're recovering? So let me mention three of these, which I think are key to the present developments. The first is that we're recovering the sense that the Christian faith, living the Christian faith, is a kind of journey. We're Gregory of Nyssa in one way, Augustine talking about pilgrimage in the other way. The Christian life is a pilgrimage, a journey. We're moving. In other words, it's not simply a matter of accepting it, buying the whole package, the set of moral principles up to now, the set of ways of operating up to now, the ways of piety up to now. It's not simply a matter of stepping into it. And this is one of the problems, one of the elements of the captivity of Christendom. It kind of presents you with a total picture and a total formula, and you step in or step out. And that's what it is to be a good Christian, is to step fully in. Whereas, actually, we're walking through great uncertainty, what exactly it means, what exactly we're called upon to do, how exactly we can reach out to our fellow human beings, and we are really on a journey. And if you can accept that, you have a completely different way of living your faith. So we've come to a point in which a lot of people have picked up Robert Wuthno's famous distinction between people who are dwellers and people who are seekers, and I use it myself in the book and so on, and I find it very, very useful. But I think most of us would agree that we're getting to a point where, for many people, this distinction is fading away. That is, people who are the seekers in the church are also, people who are the dwellers in the church are also seeing themselves as seekers. They're seeing their life as a journey, as getting closer to, what do we mean by God? How do we understand God? We recognize how little we know. What was the quote that Tomáš used there about, that he got from the Sir John Templeton? Only a small fraction of 1% of what God means is, do we have any idea now? And we have to move beyond that. So we have this rehabilitation of the understanding of Christian life as a life of a journey. Secondly, around that, and this is very much something that came up in Tomáš's talk, we have a different relationship to doubt. In the older form of being a Christian that got very dominant under Christendom, the idea was total conviction. There's no question, no armored against doubt. But if you're on a journey, doubt can be an essential part of your provision of the journey. That is, your doubt is something that doesn't trip you up. Your doubt is something that helps you move forward. Or put it in other ways, any Christian life has moments of darkness, and the moment of darkness can take the form of a doubt which shakes you, worries you, makes you feel, how am I going to go on? But this is precisely the moment. The crisis is also the opportunity, the possibility of moving on, of getting beyond the various semi-idolatrous screens that you're always putting up and projections that you're always putting up in relation to God. So the second big resource that we have from our tradition is that sense of the value of doubt. And that is in the tradition. I remember a very funny moment, and I'm now going to invoke another recipient of the Templeton Award, Mother Teresa. When she died, there was discussion about possible canonization, and then somebody published her diaries. And the diaries revealed that she went through very, very dark moments, including moments of doubt and uncertainty in her life. And the reaction of the standard media was, oh my God, she didn't really believe. They won't canonize her now. I mean, because obviously, but you know, Teresa, she is invoking little Teresa of the Little Flower and Teresa of Avila. It's just absurd to think of faith as excluding doubt and the dark night of the soul. There's no sense in these media of what the actual tradition, bit of the Christian tradition to which this woman was connecting herself even in choosing this name as a religious, Teresa. Right? So here again, in our midlife crisis, we reach back to the best resources of our tradition in order to bring them back into play. The third feature that I want to mention here is ecumenicism. And here we have a new kind of ecumenicism coming up, in which it's not simply the ecumenicism of pacification. Okay, we won't insult you, you don't insult us, we'll be polite to each other. But it's a kind of ecumenicism of friendship, of genuine exchange founded on real interest in what the other person's life is organized around, what really excites them, what their journey is going towards. And this is not just with other Christian denominations, not just with other faiths, but this exchange we can have with people who are no faith, who are atheists, but who are themselves understanding their atheist grasp of the world as a journey. We're not going to talk to Richard Dawkins, because he's already, he's the equivalent in his side of people who are sort of utterly clear in what Christianity involves. And why does this arise at this point? Well, I think it arises because we have some kind of connection as seekers, and because we genuinely are seeking, genuinely want to move forward, we have the sense that they have something to teach us. Right? Maybe it could, whatever. There's some experience of theirs which can teach us. They can even if not some elements that they teach us, they help us to as it were, shed our easy ways of dealing with our own doubts. The easy way of dealing with your doubts is to say, well, the other people are so absolutely awful, right? I mean, atheists are so terrible. I think of what Stalin and Pol Pot are doing and so on, that we don't need really to be worried by the challenge that they present to us. Together, in friendship, we can throw away these crutches, right, because now we can't think of this other person as being totally depraved or wrong or blind to certain things. So we get into another relation, but then it goes further than this. We feel as Christians that maybe this kind of friendship is what the gospel is all about. That we should be able to live in that kind of way with people from all these different views. Now, why do I think that's not just me saying it's a good idea or Tomáš? This is something that's happening. And it's interesting that after Vatican II, there were various attempts to take some of it back and not go through with a lot of it. But the one thing that doesn't seem to have been, well, two things. I mean, the commitment to human rights was never questioned, but also the ecumenicism side wasn't really taken back. It was still going on, right? Because it fits with the age in which we now are. So let's look at this wonderful image and we see how we have something like the crisis of feeling captured and prevented from being fully Christian by our great achievement, Christendom itself. And then the attempt, you can just check out entirely, become totally secularist, but you can also, if you're a Christian, react to this by reaching back for certain deep sources in the tradition. And that's what I think we see in these 4 points that I tried to make, the sense of confidence in reaching out, the sense that the faith is a journey, the importance of doubt, and the need to accompany each other in this even across great differences. So that's just a way of saying that I think that this is an absolutely brilliant analogy, which may sound at the beginning very inappropriate, talking about a midday crisis, but I think it actually sheds a great deal of light on the really important features of Christianity and religion in general in our day. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Taylor, for both joining us and for your added insights. We have now a few minutes, because of the wonderful things that we were hearing. So many of you stayed faithfully. We only have about 10 minutes for questions. Of course, we have our reception afterwards, which we hope all of you will attend. That way we can pursue more questions. So there is a gratitude to both Professor Halík and Professor Taylor, and we've collected some questions, but if there are any other questions that may then come to mind, please feel free to pass those in. We do want to collect your questions and find out some way that we can re-expand them and then put them out in order to reach a large number of people, perhaps who weren't able to join with us tonight. So let me just provide the first question. Regarding the afternoon of Christianity, what about the role of other traditions outside of Europe, contemplative traditions, and other religions such as Islam? Very easy.
I think that this picture of the day, I developed it in the context of the Western Christianity. I cannot imagine how it fit also in the history of another religion. So in Islam, there are some epochs and interesting changing. They are perhaps, so until the 15th century, the Islam was flourishing intellectually, and perhaps the shift from Baghdad to Constantinople, it was something that changed. Like it looks like the Islam was a little bit afraid of this modernity. In some way, the Islam accepting many modern phenomena more easy than Christianity. For example, science. So many Muslims have no problems to use the modern science, modern technology, and it has no effect on the doctrine. And we all know how the modern science affected the great crisis in the European Catholic and Christian theology. So this modern science was accepted without some problems in the Islamic context, but some values of enlightenment wasn't accepted at all. So there's something happened in the history of Islam about the beginning of the modern era in Western. But it would be perhaps more question for some specialists in Islamic history. I don't know if
No, that's fine. That's very good. Yeah.
So this is a question that relates to both, but I'd like to share it with you just because we're trying to condense some of these amazing questions. What is the cultural or personal problem that the afternoon church should address?
The cultural and personal problem.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it seems to me it's precisely this, the specific, I mean, there's very, very many problems or things wrong with the world and so on. But it is precisely this of how we can live together and form a church, well, the communion that involves, when we have these two rather different styles, because there's many people who still are in the old style, and the newer one, in which we're thinking in terms of seekers, how we can recreate real communion between us. Although, very understandably, the sight of a number of people becoming seekers and so on can be very disorienting, destabilizing, and worrying for people who want to remain. And so the real danger is this complete polarization in which the people of the new seeking type have no place in the church, or are either expelled or repelled, and they exist in separate universes. And the very unhealthy thing on the other side, people develop a spirituality which is largely fueled by a negative reaction towards in a sense, if we want to look into Islam, that's happened to such a degree in Islam, the reaction against any kind of differential form of spirituality, including some of the rich Sufi spiritualities that are traditional in Islam, has produced this terrible kind of closed and negative. And so how can we avoid that? How can we recover some sense that we're all together in the Christian church? This, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a result of this.
It was something like that in the religious orders in the history. For example, for the Carmelite order, there were some reformers, and they had the special type of the reformed Carmelite, and there were others. They don't need the reform, and they know that both sides are living together. So if there's something like this would be possible in Catholic Church, but sometimes I think that inner Catholic ecumenism is more difficult than the interreligious dialogue.
That's right.
So just two more questions, because with your patience, we've run on a bit. That still means please come to our session, which will start in just a few minutes. So Professor Halík, please describe your connections with underground churches in Prague in Eastern Europe. how is the intertwined role of Christianity and secularism particularly important in this contact between the Christian church, which had to hide in many cases, but then become public, and yet also secularism?
So, I can answer on the level of my personal experience. I was in the underground church, and at the same time, I was secretly ordained priest in East Germany in the private chapel of the bishops. Even my mother didn't know that I was a priest. I was 11 years in the underground, and I have my civil profession as a psychotherapist with alcoholics and drug abusers. And I think I'm very thankful for this experience, being a priest and to have the secular, civil job in the same time, because I learned to understand the questions of people and the language of people and the lifestyle of the people outside the church structures. So today it's very fruitful, this experience, because the people from the very secularized society have the feeling that I understand their questions and their language and their problems. So I think this experience of the underground church was very useful in this way to understand the seekers, the secular society, the people outside the church.
Thank you. So just one final one, Dr. Taylor. Is the reality of God keeps serving us by the word of love? Two questions. First, is it dual in his loving that focuses not just on you, but on loving all others? And second, how limitless is love of others, again, to evolve in our minds and especially in our hearts?
How can it evolve?
How can it evolve not only in our minds, but also in our hearts?
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, the Christian journey partly involves noting how far one is from having that kind of overflowing love that you see in the gospel. And the issue is, how can it come about that I can grow more and this can become really more loving? And in a certain sense, I think that has conditioned the way I look at the faith, the way I see or try to reach for the power of God, and the way I see my being supported in this by a host of others, including people no longer living, and by what we call the communion of saints. So I think the question there is a really big question that anybody has to ask as a Christian. How do I become capable of having that kind of love, of acting out of that kind of love? And not just because I have very powerful will and I'll push myself into it, because the kind of agape we see in the New Testament is something which comes really from the gut. I mean, of course, the famous Greek verb about, feeding compassion is one that is connected, as you know, to the word for, as everyone knows here in this kind of meeting, it's the word for one's entrails and so on. So how to open oneself to that kind of transformation is, in a way, number one question.
Well, thank you.